I started the recording, Mayor.
Thank you, Brandy. So with that, I will call to order the Port Orchard City Council work study session for July 21st. And pursuant to the governor's stay-at-home safe order, the city will take actions necessary for routine business. And we're conducting this business via Zoom, and it is our work study meetings. So there's no planned action for tonight. And I saw where Janine had posted that link for the Zoom meeting right on the banner on the front of the city web page, which is great, and a phone number to call in for folks. So join me in the Pledge of Allegiance if you could. So I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, and with liberty and justice for all. Okay, with that, let's get started here. Mark and Jackie, you have the sanitary sewer capital facilities charges, and our guest Katie Isaacson here tonight. So turn it over to you.
Okay, so I guess, Jackie, I'll go ahead and just quickly go over the executive summary.
Yeah.
So we're here tonight to talk about the sanitary sewer capital facility charges. We just had a utility committee meeting where we talked in the larger picture of the water system plan update that's going to have a capital improvement project list and a CFC conversation later. Tonight, we're focusing just on the sewer CFCs or capital facility charges as they relate to the recent modeling and activity in Basin 7, which is the Sedgwick-Sydney area, that has had a significant change in that capital improvement project list, which then through the amendment that you'll be hopefully approving next week to the general sewer plan that basically has the updated CIP. This is an opportunity to have Katie, who worked on our gap analysis in 2016 for both water and sewer, but we did not do anything with CFCs at the time. This is the opportunity to really look at the capital improvement plan or the CIP and look at ensuring that we have the ability for developers to potentially get credits, which will be a conversation potentially later. Right now, we're really focusing on looking at the CFC side of the equation, making sure that we all agree that having the CFC updated allows the city to have developers build and get credited, or at least we're generating revenue to take on this new list of CIPs. So I guess with that, Jackie, do you have anything else you want to add?
Just that this will also pave the way for us to be able to do these projects, or developers to do them, however they happen, through Department of Ecology blanket approval rather than having to go for approval for each one.
Right, correct. So I guess of that, if there aren't any questions relative to that, and basically we're looking for, we know that next week on the agenda, we're going to have the general sewer plan amendment, not the update. That'll happen next year. We'll move ahead with that ordinance, and then we're going to have a robust conversation tonight in up to 30 minutes to address and discuss the actual capital facility charge side. And so with that, Katie, who I think most of you know, she did a great job on our previous work with the gap analysis. So Katie, you want to jump in?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all again. And I have a slideshow prepared, so if I can share my screen, I will do that. It's nice to be back in Port Orchard, and it looks lovely over there. I missed driving over to visit in person. And let's see if this is, nope. Somebody needs to give me permission.
So I just made you host, Katie, so you should be able to share now.
Okay, yeah, great. Thank you very much. let's see, if I, takes over my whole screen when I, okay, so here we go. As Mark was saying, I'm here, I've just updated the capital facilities charge for sewer. I'm going to try to get away from alphabet soup a little bit if we can. And was here in Port Orchard in 2014 and 15 doing the gap analysis. The year comp plan was adopted in 2016. And then we updated the capital facilities charges in 2016 that became effective in 2017. That was both water and sewer. So your current capital facilities charges have been the same since January 2017. And so now that you have updated your comp plan and you will be, you're working on adopting the amendment for the general sewer plan, then it's time to update the sewer CFC, which we'll talk about tonight. The water capital facilities charge will come with the water plan later this year. Now I'm getting people in the waiting room. Can I admit them?
Can you release the name?
Lori Limson Cook.
Okay, yeah, I would just go ahead and allow them to come in.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to misuse my rights or, you know, my ability here.
It's a public meeting. Anybody can attend.
Great. Capital facilities charges are, as a reminder, that's the term you use in your community. In other cities, their system development charges or general facilities charges. The purpose of them is to have new connections coming into the system to pay their equitable share of the cost and in exchange for the right to connect to the system. And all new development pays it. And if you have upsized redevelopment, they would pay that as well. So your capital facilities charges, they're based on a combination of the cost of the system in place, growth share of your 6-year improvements, and these improvements have to be included in your comp plan that you have adopted. And they will also be in the general sewer plan amendment. There we go. So let's go through what these numbers are. You have a fixed asset report that you record all of the assets when they come and the city purchases them, and they're separated between water and sewer and other parts of the city. At the end of 2018, there was $26 million of sewer facilities. Of those, we're going to allocate 24.4 million. So let's look here. We have our first sliver. These are combined assets. You have a number of them that are shared between water and sewer. A lot of it is equipment, vehicles, and the such. Then you have more than half is your sewer mains. And you have a sliver of sewer service. And this is what connects between the property and the mains. And then more than a quarter is the other utility plant. So the services, every new connection has to bring their own. So we deduct this when we're calculating the capital facilities charge. So instead of 26 million, we're using 24.4 million of existing facilities. Now let's look at the 6-year sewer improvements. And these are the ones that are in your adopted utilities chapter for your comp plan and are from the amendment of the general sewer plan that you are working on adopting. There are a total of $26.6 million. And of that, we're allocating $20.1 million. Then we have the financing source, just to help you understand a little. As an example, your marina pump station, the cost is estimated to be $8 million. Of that, $4 million would come from capital facilities charges, and the remaining $4 million would come from rates. And then we have another example here, our Albertsons pump station. All of it will be paid by the developer. Okay, and these are all in 2019 dollars.
And Katie, can you go back very quickly?
Certainly.
So the percent CFC, so both the estimated project cost and the percent CFC, they're best guesses at this point of what these projects are going to cost. And then the allocation, again, is you can see that they're all within, they're 20 increments of 25%. Actual costs, we deal with when they actually come in, but for establishing the CFC, we have to start with these estimates.
Certainly. Thank you. So when we, in 2016, we spent a fair amount of time discussing the potential methods, and I didn't see any reason to change the methodology. So all I did was update using the same methodology. And as a reminder, you're including your existing, a share of existing facilities, a share of your future that's allocated to growth. And then the statute allows you to have up to 10 years worth of interest included on your existing facilities. And in 2016, the council thought that that was too much. They didn't have any desire to go to the highest you could be. And so instead, we included 50% of the allowed interest. So using the same methodology, your existing charge is $5,157, and it's recommended to go to $7,680. So that's an increase of $2,500. This is in addition to, in addition to anything that's at the wastewater treatment facility. There's also a separate wastewater treatment facility fee that everyone pays when they connect. Yes.
So can you just explain, if you can, in layman's term, what that is? That interest is if we needed to go borrow the money to recover?
That's a good question. What the statute says is recognizing that your existing facilities, we're using the original cost, and that they understand that costs go up, the value of money, time value of money. So they allow you to include or add on up to 10 years worth of interest on all of your existing facilities. So in the model, I know what year the facility came into being. And then if it's more than 10 years ago, you get 10 years worth of interest. If it's only 8 years ago, you get 8 years worth of interest. And the calculation takes that into account.
And what's the interest rate?
The interest rate that we're using is because we have consistent interest throughout when we use the bond buyer index, and they have the municipals. So built into the model as a portion of that is, for every year going back to 1900. So whatever year you acquired that asset, we would use that interest rate for up to 10 years. Okay. So I always like to go through the math because, it all sounds good, but it's nice to actually see the math to gain a better understanding. So we're starting with 24.4 million of existing facilities. We're adding 20.1 million of our allocated 6-year improvements. We're adding 5.5 million of allowable interest. And so that gives us a total value of $50 million. And at the end of 6 years, and then we're dividing that by 6,612 ERUs, which is at the end of 6 years, so that we get an average cost that whether you're an existing customer or a new customer, you're all paying that average share or have paid it. And then we add an allocation for state B&O tax, and that comes to $7,680 per ERU. And the number of ERUs.
Can I ask you a question?
Please.
So while we're on that slide, it's a good slide. Why wouldn't, and I guess this is an opportunity for council to discuss, why wouldn't we use the 100% allowable interest? I guess I'm just posing that question out to the group.
this assume the same methodology. So I was confused by that. I said, well, why would we use the 100% interest?
We had some microphone issues there with you. No, at
Pretty garbled.
least I did.
So my question was, why wouldn't we consider using the 100% allowable interest?
Is that a question for me?
I'm kind of posing it to the group in general. I'm just letting everybody kind of think on it. And then I guess if you have some thoughts on when it's appropriate to apply 50% allowable interest or 100%, I think that would be instrumental.
Yeah, here, I'll go back here just to show you what the difference in the cost is. And to me, it is a policy choice of the council that the statute allows you, and it's fairly broad statute for cities, and it allows you to include these costs, and then it is, and that like sets the highest that it can be, and then it's a policy choice of where you set it anywhere underneath that.
No, I think you bring up a great point, but I think before we could answer that question, we would almost need to kind of model out what kind of the cash flow over that same period is, right? I mean, I would agree that we could look to take, up to 100%, but what's the true needs based on the CFP?
If I just from a historical context, and Katie and John, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it's been 50% was a huge leap forward when we did this body of work. We went from capital facilities charges that were a fraction of this when we did this body of work when I first got on the city council, and it was a tough pill to swallow to get to 50%. And I'm not advocating one way or the other. I'm just historically we have undercharged, in my opinion, and our rates were historically too low, and and as a result, we've been challenged to meet our capital needs. But John, if you've got any other background, or Katie, I know you've done this body of work for us a few times.
I wouldn't really have anything to add. I think you're right on, Rob, as far as historically, it's, this is a major step forward from where we've been.
Noah, do you have an idea of what the projected interest cost, actual interest expenses will be over this time frame that will inform this question? Because I agree, we don't want to be going backwards, but at the same time, I don't want to over collect.
Yeah, no, we haven't started doing any analysis work on this unless Katie has. I think what I'm hoping to do is just kind of, since we only approach CFC every 6 years, I think now is the time to challenge our historic methodologies and approaches and just make sure we agree with that and because we're setting the baseline here. So whatever we do here, it's generally going to be set for another 6-year period. So it's the most appropriate time to kind of just really challenge the methodology and underlying assumptions that we're using as we kind of calculate this.
And wouldn't we know what our current CFC interest would be, and then we would have to kind of, I guess, just take an educated guess of what the new capital charges would be in any applicable interest moving forward?
I'm a bit confused by the question in the way you're describing interest, and I'm wondering whether we're talking about the same interest. If you see here, if we were to include 100% of the allowable interest, then the charge would be $8,525. And that's the difference between 50%, including 50%, or including 100%. And this interest that I'm discussing, whether it's included or not, is interest on the existing facilities. And so that would be the difference in that fee. And when you're describing upcoming interest charges, I think that's something different, or I'm confused.
Yeah, no, and I think that's kind of why we're talking through this. So So of all the interest that we're currently accruing, our current $7,680 per ERU is only covering 50% of that. And so could I make the statement that we're behind the 8 ball, I guess, to some extent already at the 50% mark? We're not collecting what our current expenses actually are.
Sorry to interrupt. This is Charlotte, the city attorney. I would discourage staff and council from utilizing the chat feature in Zoom because this is an open meeting. We're supposed to be making all of our comments public. It's akin to passing a note amongst the dais. The comment that I see was a council member Chang asking, how is the CFC amount collected from existing or current ratepayers? Is it already included in current rates? Thanks.
Thank you. That question, when you connect to the system, you pay your general facilities charge or your capital facilities charge, and then you become a ratepayer just like everyone else. So the all existing connections paid when they joined, and then their rest of their contribution comes from rates.
So in other words, what we're talking about here tonight would only be a charge to new development and or major redevelopment, correct?
That's correct. And so back to the question about the interest. What this is saying is you invested in your existing facilities, and the statute allows you to collect up to 10 years worth of interest. And if you were to do that, the charge would be $8,500, $8,525. And under the existing method, the council chose only to take 50% of that. And so, yes, they could have gone higher, and but they chose not to. And the existing method would result in $7,680.
Can I?
What you're saying is basically this addition that we're talking about is appreciation versus depreciation. Our system has appreciated at the rate of what we're calling interest.
Yes.
John, right, that's the clarification I was going to make. Using the term interest there is not a finance charge. It's an appreciation charge.
Yes.
Correct, and the statute refers to it as interest, so that's why I'm having it, and it gets very confusing because there's so many different types of interest.
And I think that's great for the council to discuss is how much, you know, what percentage of this interest or appreciation is the responsible amount to have. And we certainly we want to underfund, but we want to overfund. And so it would be helpful to me to, you know, see the other side of this mathematical equation and kind of see what those numbers, you know, look like today and what they look like 6 years from now, right? Just so we're not just throwing a dart at the wall saying, oh, we'll take half or we'll take 100%. You know, I think it's, could there be a little more in-depth, some in-depth data to help drive that?
Can I?
Well, I think what we're saying basically is this is how much, what is the fair share for somebody coming into an already existing system?
Mm-hmm.
And they're paying a portion of that fair share. And we're saying that the fair share is the cost of the system plus whatever appreciation, whether it be 50 or 100%, but that's just what the value is of the current system that they're joining.
Right, but from a fund balance at the end of this and in this particular fund, what does that look like at the end?
Well, presumably the calculations have worked out that if we are moving forward with our capital improvement plan and that the projects come in at what are estimated to be the cost, at the end of the day, we're going to be zero, other than what we have to contribute that's not being covered by the CFC charges.
I would, John, I would echo that in that we want to remember the initial chart that Katie showed us are estimates of the cost. We don't know what that true cost is going to be yet.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's more of a factor than whether we do 50% or 75% or 100.
I agree. Are we comfortable with this estimate, or do we want to protect ourselves a little bit, but there still is a portion of these projects that are going to have to be made up in addition to the CFC charges. And that's where Katie's got, some of it is going to be covered by rates, some of it's going to be covered by the developer.
Yep.
Well, and this, and I appreciate Katie to weigh in, but this CFC rate setting does not necessarily make it a financially constrained financial plan. So I don't think we can sit here and say that at this CFC rate with a 50-50 split in a perfect world that we will have enough funds from CFC connections to pay for that project. And the important point being is when you look at the methodology, again, we're using 6,000 ERUs to share the cost. So this goes back to the denominator that we're using in this methodology. So as we build out these projects, if there's only 50 ERU connections a year, that doesn't get us anywhere near the $4 million for the marina pump station that we would need.
Well, now you're talking about how we're going to finance these projects, because we are assuming that these are all going to be nicely packaged in every 6 years, or within the 6-year period. But when you look at specific projects that are anticipated to be covered 100% by the CFC charge, theoretically, at the end of the 6 years, all of those projects should be completed with the dollars that we've collected. Now, there are some projects that are 50-50, 25-75, you can see those.
So I think that's a good point, John. I think if we look at McCormick 2, for example, what I think I heard you say is that the expectation of the CFCs paying 100% of that project, that CFCs should generate $4.5 million over the 6-year period to pay for that project.
Correct.
And I don't believe the math actually works out that way.
Based on the number of ERUs, why wouldn't it?
That's correct, because we are not projecting 6,000 new ERU connections over the next 6 years. That is the total of all ERUs in the city.
Okay, now I'm confused. Katie, how does
that
that
was
work?
the math I was doing.
So what we are calculating here is the fair share, and we're using the average methodology so that at the end of 6 years, your existing customers and the new customers will all have paid the same equitable share. They're all the same. There is another methodology that you could choose where you take the full cost, the cost of growth, and you divide it by the number of customers that are coming in, and it would result in a substantially higher capital facilities charge. And the challenge with capital facilities charges are we're making our best attempt at getting a fair and equitable share of the cost for someone new joining the system. And it is, but it is not a financing plan as such. Many of these improvements will be done prior to new connections coming in. And so you won't have the money from the capital facilities charges to do it. What we're trying to do is set an equitable share, and then the city does its utility financing to pay for the whole plan.
So if we could just advance back, I just want to look at, and I apologize if I'm adding any confusion here, but go back to your final slide, or the last slide we were on, that speaks to, there we go.
It's not my final, by the way.
Not your final, but the final that we've seen, yeah.
Oh,
So
because I want to remind you that together with this charge that we are talking about this evening at the city sewer utilities, there's the wastewater treatment facility charge that gets added to that. So when the new customers, that goes to West Sound Utility District for managing, right, and paying the capital on the existing treatment plant.
mm-hmm.
So that we have to add the two charges together, and this is what they actually pay.
Right.
So it's right now 8,700 would go here.
Right. So just with the city,
I just want to be sure you were aware of that.
yeah, no, thank you for the clarification. So the existing recommended charge of 7,680, and what's the number of ERUs again? 6,600 or something?
6612.
So the total collection of that is $50,780,000.
Yep.
And so when you go back to that slide and talking about, you know, keep going, go back a couple more, the 26 million, right? Estimated project cost. So the balance of that, the other $24 million, is basically the fair share. I guess that's where I'm confused. We got a $24 million balance. Some of the customers, the existing ratepayers have already paid, right, their CFCs. Yeah. So I'd like to see the spread of really the flow of all these dollars. And no, I think it answers your question as well.
Well, yeah, I just want to add one more time. And this is why I said this is not a financing plan. Because I just want to be very specific on McCormick Pump Station 2, again, for example. 100% CFC funded at $4,500,000. If we divide that by the new CFC of the 7,680, that would require 586 ERUs to connect over the next 6 years to pay for that project. We are not forecasting 586 ERUs to connect the system. So that's where I would get confused here of what this 100% CFC really means. I know CFCs are 100% eligible to pay for this project, and perhaps you bond and borrow and use the CFC revenue to help pay for that, because that's what we're doing with the Marina Pump Station. I would argue our current loan with Marina Pump Station is what, $4 million, Mark? And that would be the CFC contribution being paid towards that. And that's going to be a significant cut from our CFC revenue.
Yeah, and that's exactly my point. I just think we're seeing a piece of this mathematical equation, but I think it would be great to see the other side of it and how it all plays out based on anticipated actual new ERUs coming online.
So you're trying to equate this into a kind of looking at it from a financial plan.
Well, a little bit. I mean, right. If I'm an existing resident, right, and if my anticipated cost is going to go to help some of this. I mean, yes. To answer your question, John, yes.
Yeah.
If it's
so
apples and
we got to figure
oranges,
out how to cover it both from a capital improvement as well as a rates.
Yeah, and to explain it, and I think to explain, and like the very, very initial opening slide, is that we want the lion's share of future development to be paid by the future development. And so having all this information, I think, would help us to make sure that the existing ratepayers aren't paying an unfair share of that.
Right.
Go ahead, Cindy.
So when we council elected to take the 50%, given that was a huge increase already, is it now time then to just go ahead and say, we really need to move forward with the 100% that we're allowed to take? Is that, Katie, is that your recommendation?
I don't think Katie's making a recommendation. Noah's asking a question.
Yeah, I understand.
And it's a fair question.
It is. I guess I'm wondering if this is a good time to move forward with taking the allocated additional 50%, given that we
can't answer that question today, Cindy. That was where I think we would need to have this financial model that's forecasted out.
I see.
To help us determine what that appropriate percentage is, just for us to go, yeah, now's the right time. Well, why is it the right time? We don't have the data to support that.
Yeah.
Right.
I guess a fair question from my standpoint would be that if we were to go from 50 to 100, that simply means that the new development is going to pay a higher portion of these improvements, which theoretically would potentially reduce the impact of the rates.
Maybe.
Well,
not necessarily. Not
I said reduce. I
necessarily.
didn't say,
Even if you go to the 100%, that is not going to be your financial plan.
Right.
No.
Correct.
Right.
Not going to cover the cost.
It's just going to, we're just doing an allocation of the system.
Correct.
to
Yeah.
new development. And by going to 100%, it means that new development is going to pay a little bit more, which theoretically would reduce the need a little bit on the other side of this finance plan.
When, I know we've talked a lot about that 50% and the term interest. I would like to focus a little more on those ERUs and where we get that number, because, you know, is that coming from the fact that you can put X number of units on 1 acre, whether that acreage is used that way or not? I mean, I'm wondering where that number is coming from.
I think that's a good question as we're diving into this. So we know how many ERUs you are reporting at every June. You send a report along with West Sound Utility District, right, for the jointly operated wastewater treatment plant. And there's a certain method that you calculate how many. So that was our existing number. And then I went to the general sewer plan to see what growth percentage they were anticipating in there and applied that growth for the 6 years and added the 2.
So I guess comment I have right now is if we're honing in, and I don't think the 50 or the 100 is as much of an issue as the denominator. If we are uncomfortable with the denominator and how that's derived, really we're going to be looking at having Katie use a completely different methodology and adding time and scope and budget to this task. So is that kind of what I'm hearing? Because again, this isn't a financial plan. This is, like I said earlier, this is our best guess at estimated projects, estimated allocation so that we could come up with the CFC. And I guess I feel like we're diving into some detail here that's really telling Katie that, okay, we need to do a different methodology and compare the two. Am I off base?
Yeah, and so let me try to get us back on track. Remember, this is an update to the plan. We did a major lift on the plan, how many years ago? Was that 4 years ago? 5 years ago? And we know based on inflation and the project that some of our numbers were wrong, and we've updated our numbers, that we needed to add some projects to the list. And we're using the existing methodology, whether it's right or not, you know, is Mark saying, I mean, we know that we've got a development happening that without some of these projects on the list, they aren't eligible for credit. And we don't have the funds, nor do we have the bandwidth to take on any more projects right now. So by getting some of these projects on the list, it's going to allow the development community to in turn build some of these projects for us and get credit. And so we're trying, the effort was not to completely, and as we've spoke to, this isn't a financial plan. There could be an argument to change the interest or portion, but I don't know that we want to take and back this whole thing up and spend another year on a body of work and change the methodology.
Yeah,
I would agree with you, Mayor, because I think if we start doing that, I mean, whatever you're going to come up with is going to have the same level of uncertainty or arbitrariness on it. It's worked in the past. Why would we change it?
I think what's happening here this evening is the fact that we haven't, the whole council at a work study, this is the first time we've seen that, where the people on the utility committee have been doing already some due diligence on this. So I think someone like Sean and myself, who do not sit on the committee, need some time to digest it. Is that fair, Sean?
Yeah, totally. And that's where, again, I know we can't come with the concrete financing plan. There's so many variables, but, I think we should have a high level idea of what percentage is the future development paying of this $20 million, and in what time frame, to Noah's point, is it realistic? And then how much could then go back to the ratepayer, right? Because if we go back to that final slide with 6,600 ERUs, that includes everyone that's already in the city. So that's, and we're all, again, the valuation per ERU is there, but I think to be able to understand the
Sean, I think you're mixing your apples and your oranges here a bit. This is where we're only trying to deal with the connections, and there's portions of these projects that when we redo the plan, our sewer plan completely, we may need to look at rates and whether or not these 25% or these small percentages that are for some of these projects that involve ratepayers, whether or not we're collecting enough in our rates. But it's really, apples and oranges a bit here. We do have the factor we use is, and have historically used, is beyond what we're going to get in connections. But if we used the actual, we'd have $50,000 or $60,000 connection fees per house.
And this methodology it's used through the state, because again, it isn't a financing plan. This is a
Mark, you need to lean towards your microphone. We can't hear you.
Again, this isn't a financial plan. This is a state adopted methodology. Most of the state, correct me if I'm wrong, Katie, they use this methodology because there are so many variables. You can't, how would you even determine ERUs if you didn't distribute it over the total? Because we don't know what those future ERUs are going to be. That 6,600 is a best guess.
So Sean, are you suggesting that we take these two numbers, 50% or 100%, and just multiply them out over what we anticipate the number of connections will be over the 6 years to try to determine gross revenue? Is that,
well, then
am I
maybe
oversimplifying it?
No, maybe take a conservative, to a liberal approach too on future development, right? Because if we're so dependent on future development, and to Noah's point, if it doesn't happen, we only have one source to make up the difference, and that's going to be the existing ratepayers. Right.
No, I agree, and I think that's working towards the financial plan, and I don't have any objections to it. I think that's a great idea if we could get Nick to sit down and do a realistic projection of what he thinks is going to be growth over the next 6 years or new connections. But the method for which we're using to calculate this connection fee, it is what it is. We'll use either the 50% or the 100% and then see what that develops.
Again, remember here, we've got a $4.5 million project on this list that we're going to use connection charges for. We've got that project built and funded. Okay, but we're going to still grab connection charges from it. If we don't get the development that we need, or the developer doesn't build this, we're going to be looking at this list in 4 or 5 years, and some of these projects will still be here because we didn't get the connection charges, nor did the development happen that the developer wanted to front those costs for us.
That's what I was going to add is, if the connections don't come, the projects aren't needed, and that's why we continue to update our comprehensive plan.
Right.
And the IP list.
It's like our traffic impact fees. It's no different. We're going to look at this every 5 or 6 years, and we're likely not going to fund every project on that list, but we're going to connect. We're going to get some of it done, and the level of development is going to drive the cash we get, and whether or not developers do it or not and get credit for it.
So
But Robin, your
can I-
suggestions, what you were talking about with that $4.5 million that the developer is going to put in, the developer is going to get a prorated credit on that.
We
4.5
built it.
million.
He's not getting a credit. We've built that project.
Mhm.
It's almost done.
They built number one.
They built number one. We built number two.
Okay, my point is it's whatever project is being funded by the developer, it's not out of the goodness of their heart that they're doing this for us and they're just going to turn around and give it to us. They're going to get a credit
Correct.
towards future connection fees equal to what they've invested.
Yeah.
It's just
So
that they're
Nick-
upfronting it.
Yeah. Nick, I think, do you have some insight to?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say that in terms of the 6,000 connections that are discussed over a 6-year period, if you can recall the map I presented at our council retreat in January, we had close to 4,500 units of housing on that map that a developer is in some stage of planning a project, and some of those projects will go forward and some of them won't. But I don't think that 6,000 connections is outside of the realm of possibility, especially if the infrastructure is in place. I think that's the biggest barrier to that growth being realized.
Nick, are you saying 6,000 new connections over and above what we already have?
I'm saying that the project map I presented in January showed 4,500 new residential units that were in some form of planning, and some of them may have only been a pre-application meeting. Others are in the permit process, but there is that level of interest in developing in Port Orchard, and there is the land to support that level of growth, but the infrastructure isn't there. And that's the biggest reason that people are walking away from projects, is that we're not funding or building the infrastructure or giving them the incentive to build it themselves.
What's our
Right.
existing
My
ERUs
question
is
is
a
the
piece I don't know.
4,500 that you predicted. If they all in fact are developed, then that's 4,500 new connections.
Yes.
Once again, this is a high level
Right.
estimate. It's very similar to the traffic impact fee study body of work we're doing. It's very complex. I know it's tough to track, and some of you are seeing this for the first time, and I empathize with that.
Yeah, and I just want to go on record, because this is where it finance differs from planning and public works, because we both are hedging on the other end of the spectrum. Where Nick thinks 4,500 are going to come over the next 6 years, I would say maybe 300 tops based on historical connections. So we're both on different sides of this kind of forecasting spectrum of ERUs and connections. And again, I want to go back to, I think it's important to understand that regardless of where these rates are, that it's not going to be able to fund these capital facilities.
Not the whole list. You're absolutely right. And
Agreed.
But I think that's why this methodology is used.
So
Well, I think
for the sake of time here, I think we've got we're getting way behind here tonight. So maybe if Katie could finish her presentation, we could hold the rest of our questions and the debate for later.
We went through this, and then the last bit is what I see for future updates is that I recommend that you update your capital facilities charge annually to keep current with construction costs. The Consumer Price Index is a common published measure of inflation. West Sound Utility District uses the ENR construction cost index. What if by updating it annually in that manner, you're bringing it forward? And so when you do go to do your next comp plan, then the jump will be much smaller. But it's intended for you to keep up with that and to do it in a gentle, affordable manner. Then every time you do update your comp plan or your general sewer plan, then we should do the recalculation. And for next steps is to adopt the general sewer plan update that will be coming to you, and there would need to be some direction to staff to prepare an ordinance for council consideration. And just a reminder that we really are about future generations, and we are those of us that understand are here to protect the ratepayers' investment.
And if it makes anybody feel any better, it was just as complex. It was just as, every time we touch this, this is very complex. Is where I'll leave that. And I guess if we could go around, what we're planning on bringing this forward next week. What questions do you have? What additional information do you need so that you can fully understand this? For next week's council meeting. So, and I'll start with you, Sean.
And Rob, just to be clear, I believe the plan is to bring forward the general sewer plan amendments next week. That is the plan, not the CFCs.
Not the CFCs. Okay, I'll step back. So it isn't as pressing as I thought. Okay. Yeah. So
good, because my response would have been, "There's no way we're going to have time to vote on these CFCs by next week."
Okay. So what is it we're seeing next week on the council agenda then? Is the list of projects?
Well, I would.
No,
I'm sorry.
Hold on
a
a second.
Go ahead. Yep.
That was a question for Mark. What is it that's coming forward on the agenda next week? I saw.
It's adopting the amended general sewer plan with this list of CIPs. The CFC and the credit conversation is still ongoing.
Okay, so we're adopting the plan and the list of projects next week so that they can be embedded in the comprehensive plan. So, all right. So with that, let's go around quickly, and then so we are going to bring this back, but I need some feedback from you guys. What it is you want to see? John,
Mayor,
go ahead.
Mayor,
Go ahead.
I'm
Yes,
so
ma'am.
sorry to do this, but I am late for another meeting.
Yep, that's okay. Can you turn the meeting back over to Brandy though, so that we don't
I don't
all
know
get.
how to.
Okay, Brandy will help you there. Brandy?
So you should be able to see 3 dots next to my name, and then right click, and then it should be able to say give to host or be host.
Now that you're talking, I don't have, oh, here, let's try here. I don't have dots like there was.
I think you have to hover over Brandy's picture and then the dots come up.
Yeah, hover over my picture, and then you should get dots next to it.
In the right-hand corner.
Upper right hand.
Oh, now I can when she's quiet. Let's see. Stop video, make host.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to change host? Yes.
Yes, please. Perfect.
Here we go.
I think the conversation is very good. And I'll look forward to hearing from Mark on how to proceed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you. Back to
Thank
Sean.
you.
Yeah, I was just going to say what would help me would be to loop in NOAA and to kind of do some of the actual financing modeling and better understand what this is going to look like for the development paying for development versus ratepayers based on a few different models. We're going to have to, it's all a crystal ball, and I totally understand it, but I think before we can answer other questions like the 50 versus 100%. So maybe what we could do is also take this to the finance committee and have kind of from NOAA's side of things, understand the implications of how that plays out. I know this is complicated, but I guess I'm struggling thinking that it's too complicated that we can't. I feel like I can get my arms better around this, and I'm happy to sit down and meet with Mark or NOAA, or just to, I just feel like there's a lot of pieces of this mathematical equation that I don't have today, and I'd be happy to sit down and learn more about that.
We did plan on taking this to finance next. Just
okay.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing here is now that we've got the bucket list of projects, how are we going to pay for it? Is the big ask.
Yeah.
Provided that all of the projects came forward at once, or in that 6-year period, which likely won't happen.
And that's why back to that other slide where we're trying to balance between current ratepayers and then future development, how we're sharing these costs and how we're dragging behind the interest or the amortization of future improvements, right? Just have a better idea of why we're landing where we're landing.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Sean. Other questions other than that? I think that was a common theme that I'd heard from others too. So as a
Well-
financial plan. John?
For clarification's sake, though, if we're going to try to get into who's paying for what, do we need to have some kind of an assessment of these projects and how many of these projects are because of growth and how many are just, I don't want to call it deferred maintenance, but
yeah, that body of
upgrades.
work's been done. That's on that
Yeah.
list.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where those percentages came in at 25% increments.
Mhm.
So Jay and then Beck.
And just real quickly, I think Sean pretty much covered a couple of it, but my question is, had we included the CPI before as we move forward? And is this something that we're going to take a look at adding now to the calculation? And two, Nick made a comment, or I thought I heard that some of the build outs were based on having structure, the infrastructure there. So what projects we would need, can we get a projection of what projects we need to have on that list for those buildings to occur? I hope that
Okay.
makes sense.
And I can answer those questions. So the CIP question, finance is always asked for that to be included so that we are capturing inflation. And historically, the council has not wanted to do that. And they just policy decision that the council has made. It was asked of us, of the council, more than once during my tenure on the council. So finance department would like to see that. So we're keeping up with inflation. The projects that Nick that's why this new list it's primarily the projects. It's updated values on the Marina Pump Station, McCormick 2, and then the new projects are in the Sedgwick, Sydney area or Ruby Creek. Those are the new projects that are being added to the list. And those are the ones that the developers are saying, hey, I've got a project. If I could get credit, our project could move forward. And those are those two projects, those two lift stations that are being added to the list. So, Beck?
Yes, Mike, when you were talking about bringing it to finance, I would like to see a bit of an analysis on both ends of the spectrum for the ERUs, because we have, Nick telling us that 4,500 is not an unreasonable number to look at for growth, and Noah's saying if it were historical, it would be somewhere under 500. So if that's the other big factor in what the end CFC is. So I would just kind of like to look at that analysis a bit.
Okay, are we ready to move on?
Yeah, just one final comment to Jay, to your comment about, looking at this annually for that CIP. I think it's absolutely the right thing to do, because when you don't do it, you get 6 years down the road, and that's where you have these massive double-digit rate increases because you haven't been keeping up. And I think it's easy to explain people that cost of living goes up a couple % a year. And when we fail to do it, and we look at this every 6 years, is where we have those massive rate increases that are very upsetting.
And be careful, when you're saying rates, we aren't touching rates. We're talking capital charges. So rates gets everybody excited. If we say we're touching rates. So, all right. With that, let's move on to our next agenda item. We're running about a half hour behind here. So we've got Steve Rice here with us, and we also have Lori Limson from Rice, project manager Limson Cook from Rice Fergus Miller, and they're here to talk to us about the community center. So we went through a process to select a firm to do community outreach, help us confirm or select a site to build the community center, and get us to a partial design. And we've got a document before you tonight that we plan to bring next week after the Public Facilities District sees it. So with that, I'm going to hand off to Nick, and then Steve and Lori to answer questions. So Nick.
All right. So we have combined two contracts under this agenda item tonight because they are related and are moving forward together. The first of those items is the Rice Fergus Miller contract for professional services And as the mayor mentioned, we did a consultant selection for architectural and engineering services and selected RFM as the most qualified firm and have negotiated a contract with them. The first point I wanted to touch on in regard to the RFM contract is that something that is standard with all of the engineers and engineering type contracts we've brought forward in recent years, they have asked for some indemnification changes to the contract. And so you see those redlined in the professional services contract, both under section, I believe it is 12, and they've added a new 13F. The 13F isn't something we always see, but the attorney and I have discussed it, and I believe you've been made aware of the implications of these types of provisions, but it's not out of line with what you've approved for other consultants.
Can I interject there? So it has been an issue on a number of contracts. We've actually had to let go a number of firms that were the qualified respondent because this isn't a city requirement. This is added by AWC, and AWC has been pretty adamant when we keep going back to them. I know that the A&E industry is upset with it, but AWC, our insurance provider, isn't supportive of these changes. So I don't think it's a simple matter of just saying, yeah, we can let these go, because I've had to let firms go over this issue.
So these are all conversations related to legal risks. So I would discourage us from discussing them in open meeting. I'm happy to have an executive session at the next meeting to discuss in further. I believe this meeting was noticed as a regular meeting, so you could add an executive session to tonight if you wanted to discuss it in further.
I think we can wait till next week.
Thank you. So moving on through the contract, aside from the minor changes to the indemnification language, we have a cost estimate for this first phase of the project, which is $400,000. We have a project schedule that takes us through, it's actually March of 2022. This schedule was revised after the packet was published. We still think this could be done in October 2021, but there was a range specified in the interlocal agreement. And finally, there's a scope of work, and it generally followed the request for proposals that we had submitted, but that was where I wanted to have Steve and Lori talk to the scope of work and kind of walk you through that, take about 10 minutes and discuss the project scope. And I did want to make sure that you're aware that this is just the first piece of a larger contract. We're going to get $400,000 to get us to a preferred site, and based on which site is selected, we will then be able to identify the exact scope of work for phase 2, which RFM has been selected to perform that work as well, if we enter into this contract. So Steve, I'll let you talk about the scope of work.
Thank you, Nick. Hi, council members. Can everybody hear me all right? Yep. So correct, the scope of work that is developed is very much in parallel with the request for qualifications, and the request for qualifications is almost verbatim, word for word rehashing of the expectations in the interlocal agreement. So all of these three things line up. We did change a little bit now that we're at a point where one of the larger questions with this project is, where will it be located? It made sense to us to take this these first two tasks and combine them, but arrive at what I would call a phase 1A and a phase 1B. I don't think it makes a lot of sense to do in-depth investigation of 3 different sites, provide options or schematics for 3 different sites and cost estimates for 3 different sites. I think it's easier to go at a more shallow level in exploring the sites and do what I would call higher level concept design in order to see what kind of a project can come from an effort, and choose one based on those parameters, and then go deeper. I think it is a more efficient and more economical way to choose the right place. Otherwise, I believe we're spending money and kind of aside from the bigger issues that will inform where to put this building. Secondly, we've anticipated that because we're in COVID and we don't know exactly what the future of gathering space looks like, we are making some reasonable assumptions based on what our industry is saying and projecting, and we're paying very close attention to that. We believe that when there is a way for folks to gather again, that some changes will last from what we're experiencing in COVID right now, but that we will be able to gather again, and we will be really interested in applying some of the thinking that's coming along the line right now to the spaces that we know would be represented in the CEC, namely meeting space, celebration space, i.e. event space, library space, and perhaps working space. We don't know exactly. But the more that we get into situations like this, everything points toward more flexible is better, more adaptable in the future is better. So it's interesting that all of this is forcing us to think about going away from specifically designed space and arriving at more generally designed space. And I think that that's a great model for moving forward. So it'll be interesting to see over the life of the first step of this contract, how quickly knowledge about what space should look like is gathered. Because you would all be wondering, where are we going? How do we know where we're going in the current situation when we're talking about designing a building that is essentially a gathering space, which we are not able to do right now. So the scope of work also includes a bunch of sub-consultant work, namely along the shoreline, potentially over the shoreline. We know that shorelines improvements are a highly desired part of this work. So our team has been assembled to represent that kind of work as well. We have ELS and KPFF on board, also KPG, who will be our transportation planner. There are transportation implications of this project in downtown. Things that we would normally do pretty early, things like structural and electrical and mechanical, will sort of take a back seat for now because they will not be major players in the selection of a site. And then my last comments, I guess, have to do with listening and the public. And, you know, there's a pretty robust opportunity here for continued public input. And so there's an outreach component in our scope of work that largely continues the work that was started by the proponents of what was called Imagine Port Orchard. And we have access to all that, which is really great news. And we'll be building upon that as we move forward. So I'd ask Lori, who's our project manager, and she's with us on the call tonight, to maybe speak for just a couple of minutes about our schedule and anything, Lori, that you think I may have missed at a high level.
Sure. Nick, would you mind if I share my screen? I think that'll be the easiest thing to do.
Brandy will have to make you the host of the meeting temporarily to do that.
Or let's see, if I click share screen.
Yep.
Yeah, so you should be the host now, so you should be able to share the screen.
Okay, good. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. You guys see it?
Yes.
Okay, great. So what we have here is, this is just a quick analysis of what was in your ILA agreement, what was in the the RFQ, and what we are proposing in our scope. So as you know, there's a little bit of difference between the tasks as they were described in the ILA versus how they were outlined in the RFQ. So what we're calling phase 1A is essentially equivalent to what the ILA called phase 1 in their tasks. And the main thing that we are modifying there is that the ILA allotted 100,000 for that first task, and we are proposing to take 200,000 instead for that first task, which will leave the other 200,000 for the next task. The other change we are proposing is that in the ILA, they talk about reviewing 3 different sites with one design of a building that would probably fit in one of those sites. And then later on, once a site is selected in the next task, they indicated to provide 3 different building designs for this one selected site. What we are proposing instead is sort of the opposite of that. We will be looking at 3 different sites, and we feel like those 3 different sites will generate 3 different conceptual designs because of the nature of each of those sites. And then once a site is selected, then we move that one design forward to probably a couple of options in terms of size, so that you could get a cost estimate of a smaller building versus a bigger building. And which we will obviously talk a little bit more about, especially with the whole COVID situation. You may decide later that a smaller building is actually better and more affordable than a bigger. So that's what we are proposing in terms of a change to that ILA agreement. For the schedule, I have this graphic here. The ILA agreement allotted, I believe, 6 to 12 months for the first phase, and about something like 6 to 9 months for the second phase. So what we are proposing here for phase 1A is that we're pushing for a goal to have a site selected by the end of this year. And if we are successful in doing that, then we would take the 9 months of next year to establish further that schematic design for that selected site. So we are targeting a completion by October 2021. Like Nick was mentioning, the ILA really allows us to go as far as March 2022. So Nick, is there anything else you wanted me to discuss further on this schedule, or Steve?
No, not unless the city council has questions before we move on to the ILA discussion.
I have just one question, and it's, I don't want to get down into the weeds of this thing, but looking at the previous document that you showed, you in 1B, you're looking at such things as utility capacity evaluation. Wouldn't that be done when you evaluate the potential for 3 sites? I mean, it seems like we're going to go through and pick one of the 3 sites and then find out whether or not the utilities has adequate capacity.
So the difference between the 2 here is that as we're looking at the 3 sites right here, we're going through this high level traffic, geotech, structural survey, shoreline. Civil is part of that, which we probably could include that in here specifically, because we do have, let's see, we do have a civil engineer involved in the beginning. They're going to go through some high-level survey and information on what's available for those 3 sites. This phase 2 or 1B, I should say, this list here comes right out of the list of deliverables that the ILA requires at this task. And that's what this whole investigative reports selected site list, that's where that comes from. But we do plan to do some high-level review of each site, and that may include utilities, but seeing that this is all probably going to be downtown, maybe there's not that much of a difference from site to site.
That's what
I
I was
can't-
gonna say is,
I can't fathom much of a difference because they're all within probably a block or two of each other.
Okay, not knowing what the sites are now, that's fine. I just, you can propose a site that builds on top of our force main, it's going to be very expensive. If you propose a site next to it, it's different. So I don't want to belabor it. It just seemed like that would be some valuable information to help pick a site. But if they're all going to be close in those utility issues, then it's not a big deal.
Okay, thank you.
And the reason we've worked kind of backwards, the goal is have a site selected on or before the end of the year so that we can, once we've identified this site, I can go to work with our lobbyist to try to get real estate dollars from the capital budget. And so that's why the date we've picked and worked backwards from that date.
Sounds good.
So Lori, do you want to unshare your screen and maybe turn the meeting back over to Brandy so that we can see everybody and I can ask some questions for Lori, Steve, Nick, or myself? I know
Go forth and do good.
we have a kickoff meeting. So next week, we're supposed to be before the PFD. What you've seen is a document that was sent to us by their attorney. Our attorney and their attorney are still wordsmithing the document. So there's still some minor changes going back and forth, but I think we're very close. Next Monday, I'm hopeful that the PFD board is going to bless the amendment to the ILA, and then we would bring that ILA and Rice Fergus Miller's contract back to you next Tuesday. Then we have a plan later in next week for a kickoff with the management team. And then a big driver to this is the bank and what the bank's going to do. And we already have a meeting scheduled with the bank and the design team because we need to know what sites are on the table.
So Mayor, did you want us to walk through any of the changes in the interlocal just briefly?
We could, if you'd like to.
Well, I just wanted to point out, Noah mostly worked on the agreement itself. I worked on the scope of work that was attached to the agreement, and it was mostly rearranging things and making the terminology align with the scope provided by RFM. And Noah, I don't know if you want to discuss just some of the financial changes.
So start on page 30 is where you can see the red line version of the changes we are proposing to the PFD. These are really logistical and administrative in nature. It's really about us making sure that we're able to qualify any expenses related to the project to be counted towards, except for staff salary, benefits, and overhead costs. They were very specific on those particular expense items. And then the other element was we are requesting for some upfront cash to cash flow the project. And so far, the PFD has been really receptive to all these proposed changes, and it's currently being kicked back and forth between our legal counsels, and I don't expect too much to change, but we want to show you at least the red line adjustments.
Everything I read looked fine to me. I mean, looks good if the legal agrees.
Well, they don't agree yet, but we're pretty close.
I should say when legal agrees.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So other questions? And thank you, Steve and Lori, for joining us tonight. And we're going to move on to our.
And just a reminder, Lori, if you can turn the meeting back over to me as the host, and I think you just hover over my picture, find some dots, right click, and have me as host again, I believe is how you do that.
Okay, hang on, let me see. Make host, okay.
And actually, Brandy, you're going to have to turn the meeting over to Ed because he's going to load a presentation for our next item.
Well, I think, Brandy, you can also, isn't there an option for co-host versus?
Yes, there is.
If you co-host, you maintain some level of control as opposed to just handing it over.
Yep. Yeah.
Does the co-host, I think I have to do that when I'm setting up the meeting? Or is it?
Possibly.
Okay.
I don't know.
I don't know either. I will look into that for next time.
Okay.
I don't see an option right now, unless somebody knows offhand how to make somebody a co-host.
I don't. I'd hang up on all of us if I tried it.
I will make sure I look into that prior to the next meeting. And then, so are we ready right now to have,
Yes, we have. So let me introduce the next subject matter, and you can, in the meantime, hand off to Ed. And our next topic is the Kitsap Transit SR16 Park and Ride Study. So, Mr. Bond, that's you, and Ed from Kitsap Transit.
Yeah,
And
real
Mr.
brief.
Mayor, if I may, just very quickly, there's not any decisions being asked for here. It's just simply the transit wants to present the effort that we've been going through to identify some potential locations and get input from the council. But because I work for Kitsap Transit, I just wanted to clear with the city attorney that no one has any objections with me. I'm going to probably just sit back and listen, but I'm going to watch and listen, if that's all right.
It's absolutely fine.
Thank you.
All right, so I'll go ahead and start out. I want to introduce Ed Coviello with Kitsap Transit, Stephanie Lilly with Kitsap Transit, and Sandy Glover with Parametrics, who has been hired by Kitsap Transit to do the SR16 Park and Ride study. And they are here to walk you through the alternatives that they have identified. I think in the initial meeting that I attended, there were hundreds of potential sites, and they have narrowed it down to 2 preferred sites out of a final 4. And Ed, you can go ahead and share your presentation, and I'll let you walk us through the work that you've done.
Okay, let me get go ahead and share the screen right now. All right, can everybody see my or our PowerPoint? We're good. All right, thanks for that.
It's switched. It's switched.
It switched? All right, one moment. Let me try one more time, huh? How about now?
Yeah.
Yes. All right, let me know. I'm going to make it a full screen. So does that work?
Yes.
Okay. Let me go back to, okay. So back, it was about this time last year at the Kitsap Transit staff, you know, we know that we have a need to provide more parking in South Kitsap, especially with the recent expansion in terms of employment at the Naval Shipyard, also with the new fast ferry service into Seattle, and then the upcoming fast ferry service from Southworth into Seattle. The demand for parking from the city of Port Orchard into those areas, or into the transit modes to access those areas, is very, very high. And so this is basically a project to address one of what I see in the future is probably more than one park and ride project within the city limits going forward in an effort to provide alternatives for folks instead of trying to navigate through the Gorst nightmare. The study limits that we chose were from Tremont down to the county line at Pierce County there, almost to Purdy. One of the things we did is we went out and we hired some experts, Parametrics, and then their sub-consultant, Nelson Nygaard, to provide some really neat tools to help find a really sharp location for this park and ride that's based on data. And one of the things
I lost voice.
I can't hear either. Can anyone hear?
We lost Ed's voice.
Okay.
And you can see that we're focusing
He's
on
back.
west of Highway 16 right now. So this is the future centroid of housing versus the current centroid of housing going forward. So that pointed us west of Highway 16 as opposed to east. And we did look at sites further east. And here's what I went over before, the reason that we need the park and ride capacity. But it's more than just the park and ride. We're also looking at trying to find a location that gets more than just single occupant vehicles, but also can diversify our transit ridership. through supporting transit supportive land use around the
I lost.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
We're aware of it.
Port Orchard, including Nick
Ed,
and
Ed,
Mark.
we keep losing you, your audio.
My audio. Okay, my apologies. It's just my internet connection. Or can you still hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay.
Yes.
I'll try to speak slower.
We've
we also
lost your slideshow.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Hey, Ed, I think everyone has the slideshow in their packet. So if you just want to turn off your video and speak, that might use less internet bandwidth.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's probably. How's it working now?
You're very loud and clear. Just tell us what page you're on.
Okay. So you can't see the PowerPoint?
No, it's causing your sound to go away.
Okay. So I'm under stakeholders.
Okay. Now we've lost you again, Ed. You back?
Test.
We lost, yeah, now we have you. We lost you for a minute again.
Okay. What I'm going to try to do is put on my phone hotspot. So can we just take a quick break, and I'm going to do that real quick.
Okay.
Okay, does the council have any input?
I think more have output than input right now.
This is the challenges of Zoom.
Exactly.
Sean's got it dialed. We never hear, you work all day, every day this way, don't you?
Exactly. Well, I think what happens is now it's past dinner time and everyone's home watching Netflix, and the entire water pipe of bandwidth is slowly goes away.
It's sucked dry.
Okay, I am back online.
Okay.
And hopefully with a more powerful
Fred.
Wi-Fi signal. How's it looking now?
Yes.
We can hear you, but
we can hear
can't.
you. We don't want to see you. We've got your slideshow in our packet. So.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, this is
Okay,
tough.
now we can see your PowerPoint again, Ed.
Okay, good. We'll stick with it there. So here are the stakeholders, including the shipyard.
We lost you again.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you've got to go away from your video.
I'm not on my video.
Well, your video's on without you then.
Yeah,
You
we
mean the
can't-
sharing?
The sharing,
Sharing.
yeah. The sharing's is a disaster.
Can you give it back to Brandy, Ed, before?
Yeah, let me do that.
We've got your PowerPoint slide. You just need to tell us which slide you're transitioning to.
I'll do that.
Explanation.
I think he's on page 57 of 69.
Yes. It says stakeholders.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I've got it back to Brandy. You got it?
She has it.
Okay, so I won't be able to share the really cool GIS tool. So I'm kind of bummed out about that, but so it goes. All right, so I was talking about the stakeholders, and Parametrics developed a very sharp and thorough evaluation criteria. And we are looking at all parcels within a half mile of the interchanges on SR 16 from Tremont down to the county line. As you can imagine, that's literally over 1,000 parcels. Among other elements of the evaluation criteria or site value, we didn't want to spend a ton of money, such as that, we don't want to buy the Albertsons and build a park and ride there. That's just not appropriate for a lot of reasons. And then site size, we looked at visibility and accessibility. We looked at how it fits in with our existing transit operations. We looked at traffic flow into and out of the sites. And one area that's really tough here in Kitsap are sensitive lands and topographic constraints. We looked at zoning. Also the potential for expansion. Just looking at some of the commute trip data, you know, we have a need for over 1,000 parking spaces. Well, we know we don't have the, that's just not an appropriate thing right now in terms of cost and the footprint on the city. So we put a minimum of about 200 to 250 stalls for site size. We also looked at safety and then transit-oriented development opportunities around there. And then we also wanted to focus on areas that were within the urban growth boundaries. Move into. And this is normally where I would present the tool that Parametrics had, the GIS tool. But we have 3 levels of screening. First was a fatal flaw level. And that looked at sites that have such environmentally sensitive characteristics or are such as the Lowe's or the Albertsons that are just community assets as well, that, you know, we didn't even consider them, healthcare facilities, et cetera. And then we went down to level 1 criteria, which, let me pull it up so I can. In the level 1 criteria, looked at things like visibility from the road, the minimum site size, and access from interchanges, and access by arterials and collectors.
Ed, it looks like you evaluated a few additional sites, 4, 7, 1,002. Is that a correct interpretation? Looks like there's a bunch of sites that were being considered at this level.
Yeah, at level 2, we had about 13 to 16 sites, some on the east side of Highway 16. Some were also near the medical campus up on Tremont. And cost and then access to our existing transit network and future growth patterns help cancel out those sites. So level 3 brought us down to 4 sites, and we've been working with those property owners. There was site 2, which is the old city landfill off of Tremont, property owned by the city. And then site 3, just to the south, is a privately owned parcel with a residence on it. That site had a lot of constraints in terms of access to Clifton. The fact that it had a residence on it was a serious flaw. And then they just weren't willing to work with us in terms of allowing us to have access on the site to look for any environmental issues. Another one off of Sydney Road down by Ruby Creek, which was referred to as Site 9. And that's made up of several parcels. And so that one we looked at and gained access to. And then Site 13, which was similar to Site 3, that had a couple of single family residents on it, made up of 3 parcels just to the south of Albertsons. So those were the 4 that we looked at in level 3. And what we've done is, after Parametrics staff went out to the sites to look at the actual physical conditions, we have narrowed that down to 2 potential locations. And we have shared all this information with the stakeholder committee throughout. So I'm going to go down to the options at slide 10. So I'm going to skip one. It's remaining 2 sites. So formerly site 2 is now renamed option 1. And we have a concept here that shows about 250 stalls. And then recognizes the need that if the site is chosen by our board, that we're going to have to do some access revisions and improvements to Old Clifton Road and Lloyd Parkway. And we don't necessarily know what those look like right now, but we would follow, all the standard engineering practices under the guidance of the city. And then the other one, which was formerly Site 9 in the Ruby Creek sub-area plan there, just north of Albertsons, east of the Sydney apartments. That one is a really interesting site. It's fairly complex. One of the things we're proposing is to kind of link it with some possible access to public open space in the future if the city were willing to partner with us. And also to have some type of shared use agreement with the parcels along the frontage of Sydney to help enhance the type of transit riders who would be using the services here, in addition to just the single occupant vehicle parking spaces there.
Ed, how does Site 2, how big is it in comparison to from a car capacity?
Site 2 right now has more capacity, and it certainly has some room for expansion, although as you know better than I, the topography there is quite challenging once we get beyond the footprint outlined in the slide there.
No, I'm referring to the preferred, the dump site was 250. You never gave me, gave us a number on the second site.
That one is lower. It's down around the 200 range.
Okay, so it is smaller.
It is smaller. It has a more diverse ridership potential going forward with the sub-area plan in that area.
What does that mean, a more diverse ridership potential?
In other words, folks from the apartments nearby, from future growth in there, denser growth that's planned under the sub-area planning, people might walk to the transit services or bike to the transit services or just live in that area. As opposed to up on Site 2 or option 1, I keep referring to there. There's less ability to build housing within a short walk of the area. There is the work release there, and then also the County Juvenile and Family Court Services facility to the south that today generates quite a bit of ridership, but we don't have the residential linkage at the moment.
What, Ed, when you evaluated your cost, did you, the Sedgwick interchange is at a fail right now, and we've made significant improvements to Tremont. Was that part of your analysis?
I can't say that we've gotten that detailed in terms of cost. You know, I think it's fair to say that option 2 off of Sydney, the traffic mitigation costs would probably exceed that of Tremont's.
Questions for Ed? Fred?
Just a couple more slides. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, you're not done yet? I'm sorry, Ed.
I can take the question.
I was just wondering, did you find out where most of the people who park in downtown Port Orchard, where do they come from?
I'm not sure we looked at it in that way yet. Rather, we looked at using the tool from Nelson Nygaard in one of the first slides. I think it was slide number 3, where we looked at the density of housing, where people live and where they work, and trying to find that sweet spot in there, rather than the parking situation in downtown Port Orchard.
They're probably related because wherever people
yeah.
come from, they're parking someplace. It's just that if we were to displace people from downtown, it would be interesting to know where they came from and what their expectations for what's closer to them to where they want to go park.
Yeah, that's sort of a neat foreshadow into the public participation element of this study. And let me scroll down to that. So right now we have a website, sr16parkandride.com, that's open until July 28th. And so far we've received 73 comments, actually as of yesterday afternoon. And it's a real diverse range of comments, but one of those sets of comments that we've seen is almost a hunger for additional parking spaces, because there is just, people are parking on side streets, they're parking in shopping centers. I mean, people have gotten really creative in the Port Orchard area on how to access our services. So, you know, specifically on downtown, that's a really good question. I'm gonna bring that up to my study team here. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to add, that might be a really good point, that, you know, if you were to park 200 cars, it might not have a huge impact on, for example, you know, be interesting to see where our traffic counts are going down, how many of those are projected to go through Gorst, how many of them are headed, you know, towards Tacoma. But the larger problem might be solving could be parking, because if it's just 200 cars, I don't know that it's it's fairly de minimis on decreasing traffic counts during rush hour times.
Yeah,
I
as I
said
mentioned
that I
before,
was
this
just
is,
going to listen, but I'm going to comment. When we looked at this, we looked at potential catchment areas, and the initial goal was to try to pull traffic off of 16 and through Gorse, as Ed mentioned. And when you look at the Highway 16 corridor, if we were successful in providing these two options, we would have a park and ride at each of the three interchanges south of Gorse. Obviously not Anderson Hill where it turns off there, but Tremont, we'd have one at Sedgwick. We currently have one at Mullinix. That was the goal. And when you look at the housing, people have a tendency not necessarily to go away from their ultimate destination to find a place to park. So we were trying to catch folks from, say, the McCormick area and the growth that's occurring on the west side of the city before they get to Highway 16. But it is still relatively convenient for folks who, coming from, say, the Bethel corridor, if they wanted to come across Sedgwick to get there, they could. But we're not really trying to capture so much of the folks that are on the east side of 16 as opposed to the west side, and take them to the multiple destinations, be it the Southworth Ferry, downtown Port Orchard, or put them on a bus and take them through Gorse.
John and Ed, just for comparison purposes, what is the capacity of the Mullinix Park and Ride? How many cars? Do you know?
Ed, you have that number?
I don't have it offhand.
Okay. I was just wondering
I
about.
think it's maybe 100 or 150
Yeah,
or
it's
something.
quite a bit smaller.
Okay.
This is Stephanie Lilly. That's currently 96 at the Mullinix Park and Ride.
Ooh, so this is a pretty large park and ride. Okay.
If money
The other
wasn't
thing
enough,
that we-
go ahead, John.
Well, the other thing that we looked at with this option 2 on Sydney is it provides space for transit-oriented development. So we would like to see if we can partner with somebody to put, whatever is appropriate. That's why there's so much space between Sydney and the park and ride.
Yeah, I think if money was no object, there's demand for both of these lots.
Yes.
But there's only so many dollars.
Right.
Well, and as Ed mentioned, expandability is important, but also we're not going to get many opportunities to do this. So build it to the extent that we can now. And granted, it might be just a bit large for what the current demand is, but as we talked about earlier, and if Nick's projections are correct, a big chunk of that 4,000 units is going to be west of 16. So.
Yep. Ed, did you have some more information? Did I cut you off?
Yeah, just a couple things. Feel free to encourage folks to participate in the survey online that's open until next week. The more information we have from a local perspective, the better this project's going to be, and the better it's going to fit in with the great city. And I also want to thank Nick and Mark for working with us on this. Their insight has been extremely helpful. Initially, I know my gut was for a site south of Albertsons, but from their wise advice, we learned quickly that just isn't going to work. Wetlands is a big problem in that area. So that has just been incredibly helpful, the local knowledge there. And what I can say is we do have funding to move ahead with design once our board selects an alternative location. And we also have some funding to begin right-of-way acquisition.
Okay. Questions for Ed? Okay. Thank you, Ed and Stephanie, for joining us tonight.
Thank you. And I apologize about the technology issues there.
It's we're all dealing with it in all of our meetings, so no problem, Ed. All right, back to our agenda, and oh shoot, I closed it out. I know that it's NOAA and its financial plans, so I'm going to turn this over.
Kickoff.
Budget kickoff. There we go. Finance had a little kickoff a week ago, and Noah's bringing forward that same information to the full council. So, Noah?
Yeah, Brandy, could I be the host? May I?
Absolutely. Give me just a minute here.
Okay, well, Brandy's giving me the controls. Yeah, this is a continuation of budget kickoff. Again, last week, because we got interrupted with COVID, we had a plan. Again, if you guys recall, in early February, we had a retreat. We had all the departments come in and talk about their departments and their needs. And at the conclusion of that retreat, there just wasn't enough time allowed for the full council to talk about goals for the upcoming year, kind of long-term planning, long-term staffing needs. It was such a condensed day. And so we had discussed having a follow-up retreat. Well, then COVID got in the way and we haven't actually been able to do that. So I'm trying to honor the intent of having council involved in the budget process early, kind of giving us some clear direction on certain policies that will drive the budget, as well as having council kind of review and reflect on the goals that get put into the budget process. So tonight, do I have the control, Brandy? Let's see.
Yes, you should be the host.
Before you get going, Noah, I don't think Ed, Sandy, or Stephanie don't feel obligated to stick around.
Okay. So in the agenda packet, in there, I identified a couple things I want to talk about, the calendar, the financial policies, and then lastly was the goals of the council. So we're going to start with the policies first. Earlier this afternoon, I sent around an email to the council. I took a section out of our current financial policies that was specifically for reserves, as these are the policies that we discussed at the finance committee that are going to help influence and drive how we formulate our budget. So I thought I would try to real quickly share my screen if I can get to it. Thank you. Share. There we go. Hopefully this works better than others. So hopefully everyone can see my screen here. What I attempt to do is to quickly throw together the financial implications of the reserve policies. So I would like you to kind of read more, think about them. But we're first going to talk about the working capital cash flow proposal. So in there, currently we have a formula, which is a 5-year arithmetic mean on the previous 5 years. So the policy is a little bit clunky as it currently sits. But what it amounts to is approximately about 5% of our current expenditures as the policy target, which for the general fund calculates out about to $525,000. Again, the purpose of the working capital policy target is to allow us to have enough cash in any particular fund to pay for ongoing operations and maintenance as we receive revenue and incur expenses. So it's really a cash flow tool for us in finance that allows us to make payroll and expenses on a timely basis and kind of weather through the time cycles of revenue. The current policy is set at $525,000. And when we talked about this with the finance committee, we pointed out that this is barely enough to make payroll on a 2-week basis. So the current policy level is not conducive to having a good cash flow mix. So what I put forward is a range, and I would call this kind of the best practices range in the municipal sector of 45 to 90 days, or how we end up calculating it, 12.5% to about 25%. In the calculation itself, that would mean that amount to about $1.3 million of cash available for the general fund to operate. The street fund about $238,000, and now we are introducing this cash flow policy to our enterprise operating funds, our water operating fund, our storm operating fund, as well as our sewer operating fund. And you can see the different thresholds, the different dollars at each percentage policy target. So at the Finance Committee, again, we talked about the value of having a minimum and a minimum that is sufficient to cover payroll and expenses. And again, I like to talk about it in the concept of days, because I think people can really rally around the concept of 45 days of working capital. This is a good minimum to start from. So council agreed, or excuse me, the Finance Committee agreed that they thought that this was a good place to start, and it might make sense to have a range that we work towards 90 days. And so here in this yellow area here is the dollars that that policy would equate to. In the enterprise funds, something very similar, except for in the enterprise, because of the nature of how we receive those revenues, we would recommend a higher minimum, 60 days. So a tighter range of 60 to 90 days, just again, because how those revenues flow into the enterprise funds and the dollars there. So what you're all seeing now is the yellow range as well for the general funds and the enterprise funds. So I'm gonna move on to the next policy. Again, we already have a working capital policy and a stabilization. This is really refining it and cleaning it up a little bit and redoing the calculations. So our current policy for stabilization is our fund 003, and the calculation is based on our general fund as well as our street fund. The current policy and our ending 2020 budget goal is $2.1 million. So adjusting to this, again, a little more cleaner, easier to read policy of 60 days or approximately 17% arrives us at about $2.3 million. Again, when we talked about this, I recommended $2.3 million as a good stabilization value at this time, as it's near where we're currently at. And as we're building the budget, it would take not a whole lot of cash to fund that policy. Again, I want to remind council that the stabilization policy has some stricter requirements on it for how you can access it. And that is in your reserve document that has a number of criteria in which you would access that. The stabilization is really geared towards an emergency, a COVID type event, a tornado type event. So it is really more reserved than the working capital. Working capital is more liquid. It allows us to pay bills, but gives us a good benchmark and target to operate from. For the enterprise funds, we looked at again, another higher target, 25%. Again, in the municipal sector, when you're going out to borrow for your enterprise funds, they are typically a revenue pledge debt, which require higher coverage requirements and ratios to get the best cost of capital or the lowest interest rate. And we felt that when we looked at what would be required of the debt market, they're going to lean harder towards the 25% end of the spectrum to get the best financing costs. And the reason that's important is as we look at the new sewer CIP that's coming out, and as well as the water CIP, we're going to have some tough conversations about how do we go about funding these capital improvements. And debt is going to be a part of that conversation. So having a solid policy will help us to establish a good track record with the municipal debt market and hopefully enable us to get better borrowing rates. So I kind of want to pause there while everyone has a chance to absorb the numbers and answer any questions.
Go ahead, Sean.
I was just going to say, at our last finance committee meeting, we talked about this at length. And I think one thing that's important is this isn't new dollars that we need to bring in to create these thresholds. By and large, and correct me if I'm wrong, Noah, this is cash we have available. But what it's doing is it's kind of tying them down a little bit. And so, you know, current councils or future councils wouldn't be able to maybe spend down reserves to a point where you can't cash flow beyond that 45 or 60 or 90 days, right? Which I think is a really good policy to have in place. Furthermore to that, we took a look at the actual existing policy, and there are absolutely ways, you know, COVID, what a great example, right? We had no idea we were going into this. And so if 120 days ago, we would have had some of these policies in place, and it could have impacted our REIT funds or our sales tax funds, we have pulled money back out of that operating reserve account and use it for other things? And by and large, I think the answer is yes. So again, this isn't really new dollars we need to create. It's just more of a policy of just making sure that the city has ample cash flow to meet the needs of the day-to-day operations. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, that's a great addition. And I kind of want to share one other thing. Again, as we're developing whether these are the right target metrics, I found this to be actually a quick analysis that was quite helpful for me to get comfortable with the targets where we are gearing. So again, you're seeing the same table I just put up there in the PowerPoint presentation. This is an Excel format now. What you're looking at is, we'll take a shot at the working capital first. You have your funds here on the left. What I have identified here is, what did we budget in the 2020 ending fund balance? So for the general fund, we budgeted to end with $1.3 million in the general fund. And if you look at that, you can say, yes, that meets the 5% target. And in fact, that meets our, if the council agrees with this new target goal, it would actually meet our minimum requirement. So we have already taken some steps in the prior budget at having these solid policy targets. So part of it is cleanup, some of it just helps you get comfortable with where you're at. What I thought was real interesting about this analysis, besides looking at what we budgeted for 2020, I took a quick shot at a projection of where I think the fund will end, making certain assumptions. And the assumptions I made were, for scenario one, for the next 6 months, we will remain on track with our budget for revenue and expenses, meaning that for the next 6 months, we will collect exactly the amount that we have remaining budgeted to be collected, as well as on the expenditure side, we will spend exactly the amount that we have expenditure for the remaining 6 months. So it's over 100% revenue collection for the next 6 months, as well as expenditure authority. And when I ran that scenario, again, what you see over here quickly tells me whether the projected ending fund balance would meet this working capital policy target goal. And in fact, it does under scenario one. So I thought, well, let's scale this down a little bit. Let's see what a different percentage would look like. So I scaled it down, I believe, to, let me scroll here, 90%. So scenario two looked at 90% revenues received while we're still spending our full expenditure authority. Under that, again, reduced revenue scenario, we are meeting our working cash flow targets. You can see that the projected ending fund balance has changed, but we're still meeting our working cash flow targets. I'm going to scale it down a little bit more. So now 75%. Under a 75% remaining for the remainder of the year, you finally see a red flag pop up that our projected ending fund balance is 2.5 million, which is below our cash flow requirement. So real quickly, what that tells me is that for the remainder of the year, if we only collected 75% of the revenue, we would still be meeting our minimum threshold as well as the 60-day threshold. And that's where the significance of this range comes into play. I want to pause and make sure everyone's tracking here what I'm showing. Is that making sense? Yeah, good. So, so pretty much all the funds are meeting that threshold under scenario 3, except for sewer, which again is now projected to be low. It's 25%. So I thought, hey, let's go even worse. We're worst case scenario type people. For the remainder of the next 6 months, we're only collect 50% of the revenue. Again, red flags tell you what policies you're not meeting, but it's a good goal. It's a good target. It helps us give us some sensitivity to the revenue and expenses over the coming months. And that's on the working capital side. Again, when I looked at this on the stabilization side, it's a table slightly below here. Because stabilization is funded by transfers, those are fully at our control. And because stabilization is intended for emergency expenses, we don't budget expenses for those. Those would come in event of something that we had to come back to council and tap those funds. So while we budgeted the 390, my revenue scenario of receiving all the revenue means that we fully budgeted it. As I scale this down, I'm just going to quickly scale down to 50%. Not a huge significant impact because we've already made some contributions to the fund in 2019. So it's all the remaining balances for 2020, which we would have less than a balance. again, I'm using this table to give me a quick indicator of how likely is it that we can meet these policies if they were established. And I say, hey, you know, if everything comes in not better than budget, but just on budget. On budget, we can fully meet it for working capital. We're close on stabilization. But again, those actually take budget amendments and adjustments because those are expenditure authority transfers authorized by the council. And so as we move into our next biennial budget, having these established policies allow the finance department to very succinctly establish what the budget criteria is for our stabilization funds, as well as our working capital for fund balances. Just going to pause there, see if there's any questions, concerns about the policies we're putting forward. My hope is that this council will discuss and give me guidance, because again, we're developing the budget right now, and these policy targets is what I will use as we develop this. Jay?
I appreciate the efforts you're putting into it, and also the folks on the finance committee. And Sean, thanks for bringing up the fact that we're not going to need a lot of additional funds to meet these targets. What is the outside guidance on amount of funds to have? I worry that there's some projects we may not get to because we're holding high reserves or trying to get to a high reserve. So guidance from AWC or other organizations?
Yeah, in the municipal sector, that 45 to 90 days is the best practices. Every entity approaches it differently based on their needs. And so I would say that is the guiding principles out there, depending on who you are and where you're at financially. Again, I think we crafted the policy in such a way that we establish a minimum with a goal as resources allow to work towards the higher target policies. But again, as we develop the budget, that is something we have to take into consideration, is how much do we want to place in stabilization versus towards a capital project or towards investing in our street fund or adding an employee. Again, that's why the policy targets are important, because it establishes a minimum and a baseline. And I think we wrote the language to be flexible enough that as financial resources allow, we can contribute to that as we see the value in that.
So, Jay, the second part of your question was to what things have we delayed or stopped? And well, this is a planning document for our future next budget cycle. In the current budget, we are sitting on some cash, and because we're uncertain as to what the impacts to sales tax revenue are going to be, and we've paused a number of projects, but we really haven't canceled anything. I know Mark is interviewing consultants for the city hall body of work in the next couple of days, and so that we can get that planning done. Now, we have scaled it back. We don't think it's prudent to be considering remodeling inside the walls of the building, but we need to address our roof and windows that leak, the clock tower, the heating system. So we are, the salary surveys back on track. We did slow some things down, but as we've gotten more comfortable with the revenue that's come in, we have moved forward with some hiring and moving some projects forward. And as long as the revenue comes in, we might be slower than we anticipated, but I see us getting most of our work plan completed this year.
Thank you.
Other questions for Noah about this?
I think the only other thing I would add to it is, this is a goal that we want to work towards, but between now and the end of the year, if things start going south on us, then we can always revisit this.
Mm-hmm. Very true. And if things go south, this is why we want these kind of policies and
this
reserves.
is why you need it, but yeah.
Yeah, you establish these policies and fund these policies when you're cash healthy and times have been good, which they have been for us. And now we're just experiencing a real event when we would actually need to rely on those stabilization funds.
Okay. Other questions for Noah? there are none, I think we're going to call the
So before we leave that, Rob, I just want a quick poll. I don't know, maybe just raise your hand so we don't have to go through everybody. But I just want to make sure that the council as a whole is comfortable with this policy direction. Again, I'm not asking you to adopt or take action tonight. We will be updating the entire financial policy document over the coming months. But as I'm building the budget, if you are comfortable with these policy targets, that's what I'll use in my ending and beginning fund balance evaluations. So yeah, if thumbs up if you like it, thumbs down if you don't. Okay, I'm seeing thumbs up. Cool. Okay, I will use this framework as we go forward.
And Noah, don't
I
forget.
just wanted to point out that Sean voted twice.
Yeah, he had 2 thumbs.
Yeah, the fact that we have 20 days in reserves scares scares me. So that's why I voted for 2 thumbs up.
Yeah. All right. With that, the word I was looking for was adjourn the meeting, not cancel the meeting.
Just make sure, Noah, before you sign off, that you sign over to me, unless you want to wait and download the meeting tonight.
No, I think we're ready to adjourn. I'll hand it over to you. And I think so. We've have kind of budget conversation on all of our council meetings. We had it on the last one. We have it on the study session, and we have a budget discussion item at the next meeting as well. And I would encourage the council to start thinking about their goals for the 21-22 budget document. I will email those out so you have what the previous goals were. And I think the goals setting just takes a little bit more time to talk, so I didn't want to get into that tonight.
Okay, you're muted.
Yeah, Mayor, I know this is just before you say adjourn. Could you give us a quick brief? I appreciate on the COVID with Kitsap. Yeah. I know that you've been sending us the message, greatly appreciated, but I was just wondering where we're at tonight.
Sure, and I'm going to touch base on the schedule too for council meetings. So I was on a webinar yesterday with the governor's office, and if you're following the numbers, it's pretty dire. Where for every case, the contacts and the outbreak turns it into 1.5 cases, and that just multiplies. And what was shared with us by one of the doctors yesterday, we're a couple weeks, if things don't change drastically here real quick, we're going to be where Florida is. And I saw where East Coast states have banned. Washington is one of the travelers coming from. So it was pretty grim phone call yesterday. Wearing a mask is very important. They're saying that that's part of what they've done in Yakima County. They've got about 90% compliance with masks, and it seems to be helping. And a lot of folks aren't taking social gatherings, getting together social gatherings seriously. You can't do it. There's a limit of 5 people, and we really need to comply with that. Otherwise, this is going to continue to perpetuate and it's getting out of control. We have I think 165 cases already this month, and we've got another week in the month. It was pretty sobering what I heard yesterday. So wish I had better news. So council meetings, we have a break planned for August at the end of the month. So we have a regular council meeting next week, and it's very heavy in business items, so it's a long meeting. We have a regular council meeting scheduled the 11th. Normally we would move the 25th. We are moving the 25th smoothing is our plan to the 18th. But because of COVID, we haven't had, some of our work plan has been delayed. So we're gonna have a work study style meeting like this with no action planned on the 18th, and then still plan to skip the 25th council meeting. So that was already in your schedule that you previously adopted. So the only twist is normally we would have 2 business meetings, the 18th and 11th. We're just heavy in items that we need to discuss with you. So we're going to do it as a work study. style meeting. So questions? All right, hearing none, I believe our meeting is adjourned. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.